Welcome in, everybody, to this draft week edition preview, whatever you want to call it, of Get Me the Brandy. Thanks for being here with you. I am Josh Getzoff from SportsNet Pittsburgh, joined by a very special guest, and I would say our expert in the matters of prospects, drafts, and everything around the exciting days ahead up there in Western New York. He is Jesse Marshall. You can find his work on The Athletic and his personal Substack, Face-Off Factor, which had its 2026 draft rankings just released Wednesday. So, Jesse, thanks for taking the time as usual, and we appreciate all the insight you're going to give to us here over the next little bit.
Yeah, anytime, Josh. So, favorite time of the year for sure. Look forward to it every season. 19th year doing a draft ranking. So, getting ready for the big 20 next. But yeah, real excited to get into some players with you today.
Yeah, it's a major milestone. I mean, 19 years as is pretty impressive. So it's been fun to watch the coverage, the rise for you, obviously in that realm, and looking forward to seeing what we can learn here over the next little bit. As far as those rankings are concerned, I know the Penguins will pick 22nd as it stands right now. We'll see what happens here in the next couple of days. Tommy Blyle's your 22nd ranked prospect. I know that things don't necessarily fall 1 through 22, but just a name to throw out there off the hop. But just to get everyone kind of informed, if you aren't already, the draft taking place this weekend in Buffalo at KeyBank Center. It's still remote for the teams, but they've now moved it as far as the prospects being introduced with those jerseys on inside an NHL building. After last year, it was in a theater in Los Angeles. Round one's Friday at 7 o'clock. Round two is Saturday, starts at 11 a.m., and it'll run through round 7 on Saturday. So the draft will go to its completion through the day on Saturday. As far as the draft weekend is concerned, Jesse, I mean, obviously hockey season's the best time of year for everybody, but where does this rank on your calendar? I mean, this has got to be, I would imagine, a pretty exciting time for everyone, but for someone like yourself who really dives into these names and prospects, what's this like?
Yeah, I think it's a blast. You spend a lot of time throughout the year watching a lot of games to try to prepare for this. Putting together a lot of tape. We try to push out as many really long mixes on the players that we're covering as we can to provide some video for some people to get familiar with them, and not really even the goals and assists, Josh, right? Because I think that tells you a little bit. But we try to get into behavior. How does somebody skate? How do they defend? They're clips that you probably aren't going to find on a lot of highlight reels for people, but I think they help paint a picture of what these players are about and the package that you're getting. And I think honestly, Josh, I think it all goes back to when the Penguins were in their early rebuild in the early 2000s. There were a lot of prospects coming through the door. We didn't really know anything about them, right? And I think it was kind of born out of necessity, right? We really wanted to know who was coming into the pipeline, and as the team was changing and the CBA was on the horizon, we knew there was going to be a lot of changes coming up and a lot of new faces. So kind of just, drove, my colleagues and I to, really dive into that. But it's just great to spend so much time throughout the year studying and, preparing a ranking. And then you kind of get to sit down Friday night and watch it all happen and enjoy it as a fan a little bit.
Yeah, and there's always twists and turns. I mean, we've already seen it's been a pretty explosive week in general in the National Hockey League, in particular yesterday, or rather Tuesday, just seemed to be trades left and right. Some top 10 picks were moved around with both Buffalo's moving on and Ottawa's moving on. So we'll see what happens as far as it pertains to the Penguins and just the draft at large on Friday night. But this 2026 class, and that's probably part of the reason why some of these picks are moving around, everyone wants to get their hands on the cream of the crop here. And we've heard so much about this class, Jesse. I mean, starting with Gavin McKenna, even 3-4 years ago, you started to hear his name. Oh, man, 2026. But it's not just him. A lot of other names have started to rise to the top and really shown themselves to be potentially immediate impact type players coming to the National Hockey League level. When you think about this 2026 class, how would you describe it? I mean, you've seen the rise of these guys that I just mentioned, around McKenna, the Sternbergs, all those guys. What would best describe it?
I think it's top heavier than we expected it to be. I think going back to, next year's draft is always the greatest thing that you've ever heard of. That's like a discourse that I think sort of gets repeated every year. But I think that a lot of people expected this one to be stronger from the middle half of the first round, Josh, down to, maybe the middle half of the second round or the third round. And I think that some of the characters that we were kind of anticipating and having a really strong draft year didn't necessarily deliver on that as much as people thought. And I think it has cooled down the overall hype. I think you listen to some of the executives talk Josh, there's kind of been this negative connotation that's snuck into this class. I don't know that I agree with that for the reasons you just mentioned. At the top of it's really good. I
Mhm.
think Gavin McKenna, it would have been a lot of fun to watch him score 150 points at the WHL, but moving to the NCAA was a great decision for him. And although the point totals weren't there, I think you saw a lot of maturity and growth in his game. I think the defensemen at the top of this first round are all individually exciting in their own ways. You kind of have your pick of your poison there. If you're an NHL general manager, you can kind of go by type really at the top of this draft. So I think if you're really targeting a specific need or a specific type of defenseman, there's a really good chance you're going to find it. And there's just a lot of size. This is a really powerful draft. It's got some small characters in it, but when you get into the glut of the first round and the middle portions and the back half portions, you're finding a lot of physicality, a lot of forechecking, and a lot of size that has mobility attached with it. So it's kind of a potpourri. I think after you get outside the top 10, I think that
Mhm.
things are really going to go off the rails after the first few picks. And mock draft people are going to be probably a little disappointed by how things work out. But I expect it to be, outside of McKenna, Josh, I think the frustration from people is there's like a lack of superstar talent, but I think it's rich with top six, top two defensive pairing type players that can really, like I said, help teams target whatever specific needs they have.
Yeah, excited to see how it all plays out. I mean, we're even seeing some projections that I know you have McKenna number one on your list, but I've seen a few that have Sternberg potentially picked by the Leafs first overall. I mean, the last time that I was in Buffalo for a draft was when Austin Matthews went first overall to Toronto. So it's going to be interesting to just see the overall reaction there. We know Toronto's not too far from Buffalo. They always go back and forth in games. So should be a pretty electric atmosphere there on Friday night when they step up to the podium to make that first pick. But as for the Penguins, 5 picks this year. It's a little different than last year's just mammoth amount of 13. When they introduced the draft class, it looked like a high school graduating class on the podium there at the UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex. But 22nd overall, then they'll pick twice in the second round, 39th and 54th, once in the third, and 170th overall after that. So when you think about that, there's some opportunity for one, Kyle Dubas to add to his arsenal, as you mentioned, try to continue to collect these prospects with these picks. And he's going to have, 3 in the top 60 to do that here in this draft. And we know he's also got some options in the following 3 drafts, a ton of picks in the first 3 rounds at his disposal. But one guy I wanted to ask you about when you think about those numbers, and maybe more so when we're thinking about 22nd overall, in particular, is Vigo Bjork. At the World Championships, we saw him. He wanted Sid's stick. He wanted his jersey. He wanted everything to do with him. I mean, I'm sure we'd all love him to be Sid's teammate one day. This guy seems like he fits a lot of characteristics that the Penguins like in a player. But at 22, I don't know how likely that is. So when you think about that player and you think about just the situation the Penguins are looking at, where there's probably no doubt Kyle Dubas, like any GM, would love to move up in this draft. Do you think Bjork could fall out of the top 10? And if so, could the Penguins potentially pounce?
So unfortunately, I don't think the fall is going to happen. The hype train on Vigo Bjork is full steam ahead. He's just been a riser, really throughout the second half of the year, and for good reason. Josh, he went over, last year and played against adults, right, in the SHL, and he was playing his effective style of forechecking and goal scoring against grown men in one of the most competitive leagues in the world. At the end of the season, he went back down to the U20 level, and it was men against boys. I mean, he had taken all those things that he'd learned throughout the year and just really it was unfair in the playoffs, well over a point and a half per game, just totally dominant. And I think people are looking at that evidence of him being able to do it against grown men, physical talents in SHL, and size not really making a difference there. That was number one concern for everybody. He's on a good day 5'10" on skates. Doesn't have a lot of mass behind him, but he can skate and he's got a low base. He's hard to knock off the puck despite that size. And when it comes to just creating and shooting, he's one of the most electric players in this class. Dangles for days, going between the legs. His shot just has an unnatural amount of vertical lift. He can really get that thing tucked in a corner from an in tight space, which is, I think, a unique trait amongst the players in this draft class. I just overall, I think the total body of work, his international appearances that he had, They've just created a lot of hype. I do think, Josh, I think back to last year when Kyle Dubas and Wes Clark jumped on a plane and flew overseas to go watch Djurgården. I'm not convinced that they weren't taking a little peek at Vigo Bjork while they were over there doing some due diligence ahead of time. And I don't think it's a surprise to me that, when you hear, the scuttlebutt around Buffalo getting that fourth pick, and what do they do with it? The Penguins have seemed to be attached to most of these rumors inside the top 10, because I think the directive for them is, if you want Bjork, you have to move up to get him. Four
Right.
would certainly guarantee it. You might be able to do it like a 6 or 7 and get lucky. But overall, I think he's just got one of the best rising stocks in this class. And like I said, Josh, for good reason, given his performance.
Well, one guy who did slip out of the top 10 last year, and maybe in some boards was a surprise of slipping out of the top 10, as in the Penguins, was Ben Kindle. And you talked about it, Jesse, with this year's group, that there isn't necessarily that game breaker superstar power as it starts to get a little deeper in this first round. And I think a lot of people, when the Penguins selected Ben Kindle last year, the first reaction was, when you looked at all these mocks, who? Because I don't think anybody was looking really that further down into the 20s or wherever he was projected to go. He ends up being a guy that makes the team, and has a really strong rookie season, all things considered, for an 18-year-old that just turned 19 in April. Moving his way up from junior hockey to the National Hockey League in one step. I thought that was an impressive stride ahead for him. Looking forward to year number 2. But when you look at this group of prospects, Penguins, obviously at 22, as they sit right now, are going to be looking to potentially strike gold again. I mean, Bill Zonin was their 22nd overall pick last year, and we're all excited to see what the ceiling could be for a guy like that. But are there any names that jump out to you that maybe aren't getting the Vigo Bjork hype train type of love right now, but could very well be impact players, solid players at the NHL level that could be sitting there when the Penguins come on the clock?
Yeah, I think a big one, Josh, is a player that the Penguins are going to have an absolute ton of familiarity with because of where he played, and it's J.P. Hurlburt. He's a forward, a winger out of Kamloops, which is where Harrison Brunick was. When Brunick was with the Penguins last year, that was a huge loss for Kamloops, and J.P. Hurlburt kind of picked that team up by the scruff of the neck and dragged them into the playoffs almost single-handedly. Full of moxie, Josh, just a guy who knows how good he is, and you can see it in his behaviors on the ice. Super confident, a chirper a little bit, not afraid to tell you how good he is. But the kind of forward, Josh, who loves to take defensemen on a walk, right? He's a good skater, and he'll get you out of position and then exploit that with a really nice pass into the slot or even a shot of his own. Put up a ton of points this year. Again, when Brunick came back to Kamloops at the end of the season, I think they formed an immediate partnership. A lot of give and goes between them, moving up the ice. And I think that he has that swagger that you kind of love out of a forward. He's headed to Michigan next year, which is probably the best place for him. I think that there's an opportunity for him to, get refined defensively in certain places. I think there are some junior things that he does that were born out of a pressure to create in Kamloops, because he was the main driver of their offense. And I think when you're in that situation, sometimes you got to do things that are maybe outside your preferred habits in order to get things done. And it worked. But I think there's a little growth that has to happen there, but just an immensely talented player that's so much fun to watch. And again, a guy that the Penguins have absolutely had a close eye on, given the fact that they were watching Brunick up there as well. Another one I throw out, Josh, is Nikita Klepov. Really up in Saginaw, again, is an OHL player, big, bulky power forward. Almost takes you back to like the 90s watching him play with how direct he is in his engagements. He has that same sort of Evgeny Malkin like gallop through the neutral zone, or really powerful. And when he gets ahead of steam, it can be really difficult to slow him down. And I think there's more growth on the horizon for him physically. He's already as strong as an ox and plays a real power game. But
Mhm.
shooting is just lethal. One timer that you could really build a power play around if you wanted to. He's a good distributor. He doesn't have that tunnel vision to shoot all the time. He's great at setting up his teammates. I do think sometimes he can overcarry it, but I think when you're as skilled and powerful as he is, why not give it a try every once in a while? So, two names that are, I think, really lightning rods of criticism sometimes. I think you see people rank them in the high teens and sometimes in the 30s. So I expect them both to be there when the Penguins pick. And I just don't think, you look back at Bill Zonin and Will Horkoff last year, who they also took, and both of these forwards are dynamically different than them. And I don't know that they really have a player who likes to carry the mail like this at forward in their system. And that kind of size being an inherent part of their game is just a huge bonus. So, we've heard a lot, leading up to this draft that Dubas wants to add some mass to the prospect pool. And I think those are two names that could certainly help him accomplish that.
Yeah, Hurlbert, easy for me to say. I probably should get used to it if he does get drafted. These guys obviously are going to have close eyes on him, as you mentioned, with the connection with Brunick. Klepov is one of three power forwards that a lot of people are talking about, maybe a little bit deeper in this first round, alongside Ilya Morozov, who I've seen anytime I look online or I read an article, this guy seems to have some kind of connection to the Penguins or maybe some potential interest from the Penguins, and Maddox Dejanay. I'm just curious when you think about those three guys in particular. I know you kind of just talked about Klepov a lot, but is there a guy out of those three if they're there? And I realize we're all talking hypotheticals right now, and like you said, the draft board may blow up after the first few picks. But if these guys are there, and these have been three trendy names we hear a lot about, is there one in your mind who best fits what the Penguins were looking for? I mean, is it Klepov or is it maybe more so one of the other two?
Yeah, I'm unabashedly, Josh, a big fan of Maddox Dagenet. I think it's a tale of two parts of the season for him. He had really grew in the offseason, weight and height, and really came into a spurt. And I'm not sure that at the beginning of the year he really came to understand how much he could use that to his advantage. And I think there was this sort of aloofness. What kind of player is he? But then when he got into Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, in the holiday season, it's like that light bulb went off, and he really became a bully. And he started to forecheck more, get up ice, punish defenders, force them into bad decisions. He'd already had an elite shot. He already had a lot of good tools, but it was the physicality that I think tied it all together for him. And another player that became a really stark riser in the second half of the season. I have him at 19. Flirted with the idea of putting him higher than that, just because I think when you talk about ceiling, we really have just started to crack the surface of what he can do in the power forward space. I don't know that this was really an inherent part of his game last year or even again in October. So I think the growth is really the table's set for him to continue to get better. The shot is just impressive. He, on that one timer on the half wall, he beat a lot of goalies this year, Josh, just by sheer will of force. And that it was, you saw a goalie sitting there kind of giving him that, where did the puck go face. And that's the kind of release he has. And whether it's his wrist shot, which I think he tucks behind him well to hide from a goalie, or just winding up windmill style and letting one rip, it's definitely something you look at and say, man, you could build off this. And I don't know that he's a center in the NHL, Josh. I think that's one thing that's up for debate. I think he probably moves to the wing at some point. But that combination of talent and powers is just almost too good to pass up sometimes.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how the Penguins approach this because obviously there's always the thought when you get that deep in the draft or even in the first round for that matter, it's the best player on the board available and whoever the Penguins deem that to be. But then there's the other side of things, Jesse, when you talk about the needs within the organization. And one of the things that, you can clearly see on paper, but we know all and all too well, just kind of researching and seeing what this organization has built over the last handful of years, is there's still a little bit light as far as prospects on the defensive end of things. I think overall they'd like to add some bigger prospects, as you mentioned, up front and on the back end. But the defense in particular, aside from Harrison Brunick, there aren't a lot of guys that are truly jumping off the page right now. I know some guys have dealt with injuries. Peyton Kettles comes to mind. But as far as just where they're looking at with the blue line, if they were to go defense at 22, are there any names that jump out? And is Tommy Blyle your 22nd overall prospect ranked? Is he the guy, or are there some other names that kind of come to mind?
I think it's Tommy Blyle. And I think another one that's got a good rise to his stock over the last couple months, Josh. He led the Quebec Major Junior League in assists as a defenseman, which is something that hasn't happened in a little while. So, he likes to create the way a Harrison Brunick does, and I think he can. But it's really the jack of all trades to his game that you love. And specifically for me, when the pressure's on, He's got one or two forecheckers breathing down his neck in the corner. He can solve really complicated situations on the breakout. And it's difficult to see him. You don't rarely ever see him get overwhelmed, cough the puck up, or make a hope play, right? Where he's just getting rid of it and hoping someone's going to get it on his behalf. He can solve a Rubik's Cube on the breakout, and it's really impressive to watch. It's a combination, Josh, of feet, hands, and passing. It's not just one thing. He can skate his way out of danger. He can thread a 50-foot pass up ice to the tape of his teammate. He can juke his way out of struggles and use his hands to get out of the way. So I love that. I mean, I think you think about how big forechecking is in today's NHL, Josh, and when the
Mhm.
Penguins and the Panthers started to win their cups, everybody sort of jumped in on the go up ice and get them thing that was going on there. And I think you need defensemen like this that can solve those problems. But additionally, he's great defensively. He's got a great gap. He's sort of the type of guy that plays a huge role in the outcome of the game, but you're not talking about him in the car on the way home because it's a lot of thankless work, right? So
Right.
blocking shots, dispossessing players. I don't think there's a game situation you could present me with where I wouldn't say Tommy Blyle is appropriate for it. So I think that sort of Swiss Army knife is something the Penguins lack in their system, and that's not to say that Brunick's not a grade A prospect. We saw what he did in the AHL playoffs; it was intensely impressive. But I think there's a defensive side to this that hasn't the Penguins haven't had in a while. It's certainly a player for me that I end up confused by where he's ranked, Josh. I think people look at his size; he's 6'1", 170, and they say, "Well, that's too small." But I don't think he's going to stay 170 forever. I think he's still got some growing to do, and he's going to hit another weight room soon that's going to really bulk him up. So really impressive guy, and I think if the Penguins are looking for defense, he should be right in their wheelhouse.
All right. Well, that's a guy we'll definitely have circled in Sharpie should he be on the board when the Penguins come up at pick number 22. I wanted to have a little fun here. I know this is your expertise, like we said, so I want to do a little rapid fire if you're okay with it. When you talk about just this draft in general, I want you to kind of scan your brain of all the names and all the attributes rather, and give me your answer to these questions. All right, you ready?
Ready,
Okay. Who is the best skater?
Gavin McKenna.
Okay. Who has the best shot?
Maybe not, but maybe not because he's the fastest, Josh, but he's the most creative. How about that?
Okay. All right. Hey,
But yeah,
creativity creates opportunity. So,
yeah. Next one, you said best shot.
best shot.
Ethan Belchets, who's a power forward that I have ranked 10th out of the OHL. Really big guy, but when he gets a hold of them, Josh, it's violent to say the least, and he can really blow him by the goalie. So even if his skating doesn't come around or some of the other parts of his game don't round out, I think his shooting alone is going to launch him into a professional career.
Okay. This next thing is not a buzzword, but kind of a buzz characteristic that you hear so much about players going into this draft. Highest hockey IQ.
Mm. Highest hockey IQ in the draft. I would probably go Chase Reed. I think at the end of the day, it's tough for me to come up with another answer. I have him marked as the best defenseman in the class, and it's just his decision making processes, Josh. It's he's always making the right decision. He knows when to live to fight another day on the breakout. You don't see him force anything. I think defensively, he pre-reads things really well and it identifies threats before they matriculate, which allows him to be in the right place to shut it down. But just his game sense is so strong. It's tough for me to put anybody else above him.
That's fair. Most NHL ready.
Mm. Most NHL ready. Probably Stenberg. Last year, full year in the SHL, played against men the entire time. Had absolutely no trouble with it whatsoever. And I would argue was really from the onset controlling the play against adults from his first step onto the ice. So I think it's his size, it's his shot, it's his skating. He's really good at knowing when to turn on the jets. He's watching that defenseman, Josh, and when that defenseman turns their hips or takes that pivot, he attacks. And I think that's just such an impressive trait. And it's when you prove yourself against men in a really tough league like the SHL, I think there's an element of readiness to that it can't be ignored. So I'd probably go with Stenberg.
All right, and last one for you, and this is probably a little controversial. I'm curious to hear your answer. Biggest boom or bust prospect in this year's draft?
Wyatt Cullen. I think it's Wyatt Cullen, Matt Cullen's son.
Yep.
I love if you rank this draft class, Josh, just by hands, shot, dangle ability, the ability to skate, to chain skills together. You'd put Wyatt Cullen in the top three. He
Wow.
is that good with the puck. The problem is, I think that for as big as he's gotten, that physical element for him has not come into play yet. He hasn't figured out how to use his size. I think he's shied away from it at times, but he's going to Minnesota, which is an unbelievable program. I expect a lot of growth there, but I think if he stayed as is right now, Josh, I think there's a lot of risk in the way that he plays the game today. There's also a lot of reward. Danglers like this don't grow on trees, and he's
Mhm.
a young guy. But I think if the more junior elements of his game, I think don't disappear. That brings in a lot of risk to his overall development.
Well, obviously, we all know his dad, and he was excellent this year in some international action, as you mentioned. Just overall, seems to be on the rise. So that'll be a name to watch and a name we know back in Pittsburgh. Wanted to transition as we look ahead to this week's draft. Look back now to last year's draft, and this was probably when you think about Kyle Dubas building out his Pittsburgh Penguins and his vision. And I know he had a couple drafts prior, but to have 13 picks, to have three in the first round this was probably the initial groundwork of what he's hoping to build here in Pittsburgh. When you look at the big picture, and I mentioned those three first round picks. Obviously, we talked about Kindle making the team out of camp. Bill Zonin was injured in the beginning of the year. Then, as you mentioned, really impressed down the stretch and with Wilkes-Barre in the playoffs. And Will Horkoff, it started off the year. It seemed like everything he touched went in the net, and then cooled down a bit post World Juniors, but still played for the U.S. in the World Juniors, which is always a big achievement for any young player. When you look at those first round picks and you think about last year, and now you look ahead to, it's crazy to say, but we're already less than 3 months from the first preseason game for the Penguins, and just in general the hockey season. What do you think, or who do you think is the person that you're most intrigued to watch the growth continue with next year?
I think it's Bill Zonin, Josh, and I expected Bill Zonin to be an in fact impactful player at the AHL level. I think he's very aggressive. He loves confrontation. He's an in your face player, but I didn't expect the performance I think we got out of him and how critical he was to that team in that last round he played. I think there's a lot to build off of there. He's worked really hard on the skating, and I've had the chance to catch up with his skills coaches, and getting lighter in his boots and more traditional in his approach. I think has been a really big focal point for them, and I think it's paid dividends. I think it's just given him an extra step in those really short distance puck battles that he often finds himself in. And I look forward to him being able to employ that more. I think that last year was probably a frustrating one for him, not only because of the injury, Josh, but I think remember he's on a different team, right, and on a different line with different line mates, and I think there was less of an opportunity for him to do the things that he likes, which is carry the puck. He was playing with Justin Carbonneau, who's unbelievable talent from St. Louis Blues drafted, and he's a puck carrier by nature, and I think that made Zonin more of a sidecar sometimes. So I think getting him into an environment where you can get back to that and getting him carrying the mail and shooting off the rush is going to kind of, I think be fun to watch and is something he's yearning for. So certainly for me, no knock to any of the other players they drafted, but I think Bill Zonin is the one that I think people in Pittsburgh will probably love the most, given his style of play and the way he approaches the game.
Well, aside from Zonin and Kindle and Horkoff, 10 other picks, as we mentioned, for the Penguins in that draft last year. Besides the first rounders, when you think about some of the years that some of these guys had, and I've caught a couple of your breakdowns of Ryan Miller, for example, in the season he had in the Western Hockey League, who, maybe he's the guy, but which 2025 draft selection that wasn't a first rounder do you feel like you came away from the year and the body of work thinking, wow, they really may have something here?
I think it's Kale Dock, Josh, which is a name not a lot of people know. But when Kyle Dubas grabbed him, it was out of the BCHL, which is the British Columbia Hockey League. And then he made the transition this year to go to Calgary in the WHL, which is a better league, bigger players, faster players. And he
Mhm.
didn't just adapt, he thrived. Dominated last year, almost like a Ben Kindle light. You know, you get the same kind of vibes for Ben Kindle as you get from Kale Dock, where his good defense creates opportunities for him to counterattack on offense. And his processor from an IQ perspective is really strong. So when he gets on the transition and he gets to attacking, he's making the right decisions. He's distributing the right ways, positioning himself in a way that's helpful to his teammates. Good shot, great finisher. All of that, I think, there's always a question when you take somebody from the BCHL and then they're going to move leagues. You
Mhm.
don't necessarily know what you have, but I think as the year went on, he really proved to be a sharp offensive mind, good skater, has a lot of skill, and I think definitely looking to build off that next season. I think he's going to be somebody you're going to want to watch, and I wouldn't be shocked if the point totals for him went through the roof.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens with him. And I agree. I think that when you think about especially value picks, I mean, seventh round to get a guy like that, you can't get much better value. And that kind of leads me to where, we were going to go next. When you talk about just the Penguins at large and their prospect system, your colleague Scott Wheeler, who also is all over it as far as the prospects and prospect rankings at the Athletic, Penguins are up to 16th in the NHL. And while some people may say, well, that's middle of the pack, they were way behind the pack only a couple of seasons ago. And it's been a pretty remarkable climb forward with who they've been able to add and how they've been able to bolster that area of their organization in such short order. What can you say about the work that Kyle Dubas and this Penguins front office? I know Wes Clark's played a huge role, especially in the Kindle selection. That they've just been able to not make over the prospect pool, but just dramatically enhance it here so quickly and get things in the right direction.
Yeah, to your point, Josh, 16th might not sound impressive, but when you start 32nd, it's not too bad. I think it's been great. And I think everywhere he's been able to, Josh, Kyle Dubas has bought lottery tickets, right? And that's what, prospect growth sometimes is. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't, but your best chance of winning is to buy as many tickets as you can. And there's a lot of players that he's acquired via trade that are now really important to the minor league systems in this organization. There's players like Melvin Fernstrom that he's taken a chance on and brought over to see what they have. You had Mikhail Ilian come over this year, and it was great to see
Mhm.
Dubas was able to facilitate getting him on North American soil. That's just as important as the drafting, right? The ability to identify talent in other organizations and bring them into your own for good deals. I think, but that between that and the drafting, it's that era for the Penguins post Crosby Malkin is always going to be kind of dark and scary. But I think you position yourself now in a much better position, knowing that there's at least something in the cupboard, right, that you can reach down and grab from to make that transition a little simpler. So there's more work to be done. I think again, like you said, with the lesser amount of picks you have this year, there's more pressure to get it right. But I think to take them to where he has in such a short period of time is nothing short of impressive, and really a testament to the kind of builder that Kyle Dubas is.
I feel like just with the way that people thought perhaps last season was going to go, a lot of people were interested in the prospects and kept an eye on them, honestly, even as the year went well for the Penguins, just to see what some of these guys were doing. So we've heard a lot of names. We've heard a lot of excitement around a bunch of those names. But if there is a guy that maybe is not getting quite as much of the spotlight right now, who's in the Penguins system, who, maybe you could say to fans, don't forget about this guy or keep a watchful eye on this guy, even though you don't know all that much about him and haven't heard that much about him going into this season. Who might that be?
It would be Mikhail Ilian, Josh. It would be,
Okay.
and it's out of sight, out of mind because he was in Russia, right? And he wasn't playing in North
Right.
America. It's tough to find clips of the league that he was in. You might get lucky on Twitter every once in a while, but it's not a widely broadcasted set of games. And I think there was a question about how would he handle the transition. It's a different size ice surface. He is a player who in Russia used every inch of that ice, so it was reasonable to assume that there might be an adjustment, but there wasn't. I think he stepped over to North America, was immediately impactful, made what adjustments to his own approach that he needed to, and scored some really critical goals for Wilkes-Barre down the stretch running into the playoffs. And, we always look at statistics as being predictive in nature, Josh, like at what rate you score at what age is usually giving you some kind of predictor of future success. And for Elian, those predictors are very strong. He's scored everywhere he's been. You can now include the AHL in that summary of leagues, and I think that's a very huge positive for the Penguins. Is he's a big, sniping like winger that's got a lot of really individual skill that can draw you to the edge of your seat, and some of the things he can do with his hands are just phenomenal. But again, I think because he was so far away for the last couple years, it was out of sight, out of mind. A lot of people weren't familiar with him. Somebody I would 100% watch at development camp this season, but I think you're likely to see him put on a little bit of a show. But I think noting how well he played in the AHL, Josh, it's just that solves a lot of the concern you had for him coming over, and he was able to answer it directly.
I kind of feel like I know where you're going to go with this next question as it pertains to the prospect system, because we've talked so much about the forwards and I mean the goaltending. We kind of know who the Penguins have in the pipeline and who might even be up in Pittsburgh as early as this season. But is there an area in this Penguins prospect system that you think is missing? And even maybe if it maybe obviously as a defenseman, is there just intangibles within that you think that the organization could add more of?
Yeah, I think it is defense, Josh. And here's the other thing too. They're getting a little long in the tooth at goalie all of a sudden. That kind of
Right.
happened out of nowhere, didn't it? But you have Sergei Murashov, who's by all intents and purposes poised to make the next step, right, and to get up into the NHL
Right.
potentially. I think that there's a couple guys who are going to have to move up to fill his spot. You have Gabriel Dag, who you did draft last year and is joined the pro ranks, but I think as some of these players move up, I think goalie is a place I'd also consider for some of the more mid to later rounds. But it's defense for me. I think it is. And again, I think what they have in Harrison Brunick is unique. It's very unique. He is very individual when it comes to his ability to carry the puck, and not every defenseman can do it the way that he does it. You have Owen Pickering, that's more of that defensive defenseman, right? That's going to take care of his own end and mind his business there. But like I said with Tommy Blyle, Josh, I just don't know that you have that defenseman that you could say I can deploy him in any situation. It doesn't have to
Right.
be in the offensive zone. It doesn't have to be in the defensive zone. Anything I need, he can do. And I think that sort of Swiss Army knife is what they're missing. They did get Quinn Beauchene last year, who I'm a big fan of, and is moving on to college next season, which I think will be better for him. But just I think a defenseman with size that can carry and defend is something that they're really going to be looking for.
Okay, well, you mentioned Quinn. I'm curious. You've obviously seen and watched so much of these guys over the last calendar year, and even beyond that, with some of the prospects that have joined the system previous seasons. Is there one who is your favorite that you really feel like this is the guy for Jesse Marshall? Which prospect would you say is your favorite one?
Well, it's probably cheating to say Murashov at this point, isn't it, Josh? I think that might be. I might.
He's
So we'll
everyone's
pick
favorite.
another one. Yeah, I think we'll pick another one. I do like Bill Zonin. Again, for me, Josh, he plays an NHL game, and I think that at the bare minimum, right, at the end of the day, at the bare minimum, he's a guy that you could put on your third or fourth line if he doesn't hit a ceiling and not think twice about it, because he's physical, he's good defensively. The ceiling is just much higher than that, and that's what we're watching develop and happen now. I am a big Ryan Miller fan too. I think everything I just said about Zonin could probably be applied to Miller. And he's the type of player that you would almost expect to play pro at some point in his career, just because of how good his defensive habits are, how engaged he is physically. And another one that I think the sky kind of might be the limit on that. He scored in 20 plus consecutive games this season. So when you talk about guys that are waking up and finding their scoring touch, that's not an easy thing to do in any league. So I'm keeping a really close eye on him. I think this year coming up is going to be super crucial to his development. But those are two players, Josh, that are usually engaged in the behaviors that a coach loves. And because of that, and because of their dedication to like the finer points of the game, their cognizance defensively, their willingness to hit and be physical, that gives them a very direct path to the NHL, even if it's in your bottom six. And I think that there's potential for them to do more if their development hits and goes well, front to back.
Well, a lot to be excited about as far as these prospects are concerned, and also just to continue to watch it build here over this weekend and see who and how many prospects Kyle Dubas and his staff can add to the Penguins' arsenal. That's as far as the future is concerned. Let's flip to the present because the NHL has been, can I say on this podcast, on crack this week? Yeah, I think I can. It has been out of control. I just did. Sorry, Nick. You can edit that if you need to. It has been out of control this entire week with all the trades going down. And it started, by the way, happy belated Father's Day to you, because it started on Father's Day with newly minted father Brady Tkachuk going to join his brother Matthew with the Florida Panthers, traded from the Senators, where he was the captain, 9th overall, 25th overall, the 2029 first round pick of the Panthers, which, by the way, they now have 0 firsts through that, and the 2030 second round pick of the Panthers. Obviously, Brady Tkachuk needs no introduction. Anybody who's watched even a snippet of hockey, even internationally, the last couple of years has seen his name and seen what he's all about. But what was your initial reaction when you saw that trade go down? Because I'll be honest, when I first saw it come across my phone, I just thought it was AI or a weird Photoshop. It didn't seem like it was real. And then when you see all the sources putting it out there, you're thinking, oh my God, this is actually real. It's quite a team that the Cats have down there to get back into the hunt this year.
Yeah, the rich get richer, right? I think I watched the podcast, Josh, with the Kachuk brothers and their dad, where there was a little bit of joking. I guess it wasn't joking about the state of the Senators, and yeah, and it really was foreshadowing. But I think reading what was being said in Ottawa, there was almost this it could never happen type thing about it, right? Like we'd never see this take place. So I was shocked to see it happen now. I guess it makes sense before the draft, but yeah, I mean the two brothers together, they're going to be a wrecking ball down there. Brady says that he made the decision independent of his brother. I'm not sure I believe that, especially given that podcast. But yeah, that a heavy price to pay. But I think Ottawa did okay here, really. And I know you can't replace a player like that immediately, right? It's going to be really hard to do that. And the draft picks probably aren't going to help. But if they can make a splash in free agency, Josh, and bring a couple guys in, make smart decisions with the picks they have, you never know. I mean, it's hard to say you'd be better off losing that kind of talent, but with the haul that they got back, I think they did as good as they can do given the circumstances, right? I think that they kind of had their feet held to the fire a little bit. I think the player kind of controlled where he wanted to go, which is frustrating as a GM, I'm sure. But despite that, I think they still did okay. They got some assets, and they can play around with those assets to try to move for an equivalent replacement for him.
Well, probably in a way, maybe not so much dramatically, but in a way, spoiled the Carolina party a little bit, just knowing that, oh, yeah, right, those guys are still there and they're going to be healthy and ready to go next season. But obviously, the Panthers are loaded. We know that. But that's the first of a few big trades that have happened. We've already seen, as I mentioned earlier in the show, a couple of top 10 picks have already moved. Chicago trading the 4th overall as part of a package for Bowen Byram. The 9th overall, that Senator pick, went to San Jose, bringing William Eklund back over to the Senators, and Connor McMichael, part of a package from the Capitals. It's 16th overall, I believe, that went to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for Jordan Kyrou. So he's now in the Penguins division as well. So there's been some big names moving. You still hear rumors out there about Jason Robertson, Robert Thomas, Connor Hellebuck, Dylan Larkin's requested a trade. Matthew Nyes has requested a trade. Elliot Friedman just came, Matthew Nyes has not requested a trade, but has been rumored about it. Elliot Friedman just came out and said after the draft, Zach Werenski and the Blue Jackets are going to meet. So, my goodness, I mean, it's not just some names. These are massive names. Do you think that of those guys I just listed, or maybe even outside of that group, there are going to be some bigger names continuing to move here in the coming days? And I mean, could it happen at the draft with those picks that you mentioned being at such a premium for some of these teams?
I think a lot of these conversations, Josh, are going to extend all the way to the point of the draft, the virtual draft floor, if you will,
Yeah.
and potentially take a lot of time to wind up. So I wouldn't be shocked if you saw, harkening back to the old Jordan Stahl trade that shocked the world, right? When the Penguins made it all those
Right.
years ago, you might see something like that still happen here because I think the amount of like, look at the list of names you just listed off. I mean, that's a, you could build a heck of a team with those guys. So I think, there's a lot of antsiness right now with the cap changing and the landscape changing. And I think that some of these deals again are really complicated, and I wouldn't be surprised if the conversations extended into Friday night before we found any finality to them. So we are in the height of silly season, my friend, and I think that we may see it continue for a couple more days.
I mean, I'm always in the business of wanting full on chaos. So, as many times as Gary Bettman can go up to the podium Friday night and say, we have a trade to announce, I'm all in. Even if it doesn't concern the Penguins, I'm all in. It'll make it entertaining.
Yeah.
When you think about just this Penguins team, as we flip it back here to Pittsburgh, and we talked about a few of these prospects, Jesse, I'm just curious before we wrap up, your thoughts on some names that aren't really off the radar, like some of the guys we mentioned on this show, more so names that we've heard. Some of them we've seen in Pittsburgh in recent seasons. Rucker McGroarty, Ville Koivunen, Avery Hayes. I know that there are some people that are down on some of those guys, want to see more out of those guys, not really sure what their ceilings are. Of those three, is there a guy that you feel should get the most opportunity going into this year for the Penguins? I mean, it's a realistic possibility we see all three. We know that, but of those three, who would you zero in on?
Rucker McGroarty has come a long way with his skating, Josh. I think from the time he entered the Penguins organization to present day, he's gotten a lot lighter on his feet. I think he was very good for Wilkes-Barre in the playoffs, produced some signature moments for them in the playoffs. I think last year was frustrating for him because of the injury that he got right at the onset of the year. They never really kind of got a chance to prove himself to the big club, I think, at any point, and I think he's chomping at the bit to do that. Ville Koivunen, I know people are down on it. It's still so early, Josh. It's just so early. He has not played enough NHL games for anyone to begin panicking about his development yet. It's just too soon for that. He's got a real, he's kind of a jerk in the American Hockey League, and I'd love to see him bring that up. I think that's what's missing is that sort of like aggression. And, you look back at the playoffs this year for Wilkes-Barre, and he was not making a lot of friends. There was a lot of people on the opposing team wanted to get after him. And I think that's just what's missing for him is that sort of oomph, right? At the NHL level, he's almost sometimes we feel like a little too passive. And I don't know how you can't look forward to Avery Hayes. What a bummer for him that he scored those goals. There's an immediate break, right, for the Olympics. And he comes, you kind of try to carry that momentum with you across that
Right.
period. But he's someone I expect to play in the NHL, Josh. I do. You've seen it, just the burst he has in his skating
Yeah.
and the ability for him to flip that switch and get around somebody before they even realize what's happening. He's got that low base, hard to knock around for his size, confident in his abilities. I think you'll see all three of them next year. But if I'm a betting on someone, I'm betting on Rucker McGroarty, just because I think of how far his skating's come and how eager he is to try to get back to the NHL level and prove he can belong there.
Okay, and we know training camp. I mean, Dan Muse established this last year. We expect full competition, roster spots up for grabs. Even still here, sitting here in mid to late June, not knowing who the prospects and who the pieces will be that enter the Penguins fold here in the coming months. Last question I have for you is about a guy that everyone's talking about. And we, I think, fully expect to see, if not on the opening night roster, very shortly thereafter in Pittsburgh, is Sergei Murashov. He seems to have, I hate to say this about a kid that's in his early 20s, but he seems to have hit everything he could possibly do at the minor league level. It seems like it's now or never to move him up. And I realize, like I say that out loud, that sounds ridiculous. He's a goalie. Goalies take a while to develop, but he's done so much. He's been so impressive. If he were to be up here this year, and obviously if being the important part of that sentence in question, what's the biggest concern you'd have with him in making the full-time jump to the NHL? Because we saw him in a couple spurts last year, but just the full-time commitment to playing in the league's highest league or the sport's highest league.
Yeah, the shooters are much more intentional in the NHL. And I think that for somebody like him, his rebound control has grown by a country mile in the last year, but I think it's still potentially, the kryptonite of his game. I think sometimes he's so athletic and his athleticism is so strong that he can make reaction saves that a lot of goalies can't make. And I think in those
Okay.
moments, Josh, he's not thinking about where that puck's going to go. He wants to make the save, right? I think that when you have shooters that can manipulate you and pass off pads, right? Kill pucks at right at your crease. It becomes harder to manage that. But again, I even in the AHL, when he got himself in trouble from a rebound control perspective, his gross athleticism is just so unbelievable that he often can work himself out of the bad situations that he finds himself in as a result of a rebound. So, I think I don't know that it's a major concern of mine anymore because, again, really addressed it. He had a couple misplays in the playoffs last year. I know people brought up, but I thought those were anomalies. I think it's really being able to not get manipulated by shooters and rebounds at the NHL level that makes me only a little bit concerned. But again, he's got the athleticism of a Marc-Andre Fleury. It's sort of where he's governed by no rules in goaltending and just, again, raw reaction speed. But the demeanor of Matt Murray is just unflappable. He doesn't care about what's happening around him. You can spray him, you can hit him in the back of the head, and he just turns around and skates away and is sort of almost emotionless to big moments. So I don't think there's anything left for him down there. I just having watched him in the postseason this year and noting that there were nights where he was in total control of the game as a goaltender, right? Like knowing when to kill a
Right.
play and get a whistle, knowing when to come out of the play and get out of the net and get it up to his defenseman. That's all come so far in the last year and a half. I do think he's ready to go. And, again, I think there's elements of him that are still very raw. But
Mhm.
you bet your money on his reaction time and athleticism over everything else.
Well, if that is the guy that's up here, there is no one Penguins fans are more excited to see in a Pittsburgh Penguins jersey as the young prospects are concerned than Sergei Murashov. And no one Penguins fans are more excited to hear from about the draft than Jesse Marshall. So, Jesse, thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks for being here. Look forward to following your coverage on The Athletic, also at Faceoff Factor. Anywhere else people can find you this weekend as the NHL draft gets going?
That's it for now. Yeah, we're gonna do a little live show on Twitter for the night of the draft. So hop on in if you want to hang out with us and try to enjoy all the chaos together.
All right, Jesse, thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the draft, and I'm sure we will talk again soon, my friend.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.